Hey everyone, welcome back to Right Media Group Chronicles. Today I'm sitting down with Taylor Martin, founder and chief creative at Design Positive, a brand and web accessibility agency that's been in the game for nearly 2 decades. Here's what caught my attention when I spoke to Taylor previously. Taylor turns down clients who don't align with their mission. 67,000 businesses got sued last year for inaccessible websites, and we're about to unpack why most agencies are leaving money and lawsuits on the table. Let's have a great conversation, Taylor. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
So, you had a moment with a nonprofit CEO who said your broker would bring in millions. How did that rewire your brain?
So it happened at a very interesting inflection point in my life where I was working for a lot of for-profit organizations that were like, Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 companies. And my job was to make their brand elevated and to communicate their complexity of what they do in the easiest, simple form that's on brand and really able to connect with people so people understood what they did, so people would feel more confident in investing in them. And I enjoyed it immensely. It was a lot of fun. I love big problems and complexity of things and bringing it down to something that's really digestible. A friend of the family was the CEO of a nonprofit, and he heard about the work I was doing, and we got a meeting and we talked about what they were doing in their nonprofit space, and we worked on the project together, and we brought about this, I would say, very customized brochure. I even hate to use the word brochure. It wasn't any report, but it was a brochure, multi-page, and it spoke to how they were creating this new technology that was in depth and complex, and we were trying to make it simple so people could understand. And after we were done with this project, he held it in his hands and he was like, "This is the most expensive brochure we've ever spent money on, but the millions of dollars I can get in funding pay for it day one." So I just thought about, this is in the cancer space. And I thought I
Yeah.
just possibly, benefited my part in doing something good for, the progression of solving cancer or dealing with or, helping out the cancer industry. And it just made me think that that's very visceral. That happened. And shortly thereafter, I was in a position where I was like, you know what? I think it's time to start a business. And so I did, and Design Positive was born out of that, and I just wanted to focus on organizations that were mission driven,
Mhm.
and our mission is to accelerate their mission, right? Whoever that may
Mhm.
be. And during the time, there was not a lot of people doing that, and I got a lot of pushback from a lot of my colleagues and people that knew me. They were like, "There's not enough businesses like that," but I started advertising, I got out there, and I picked up Greenpeace as a client. Immediately, I got Salvation Army as a client, and I picked up work, and things have just been progressing ever since, and I really don't advertise that much anymore now, it's just word of mouth and my LinkedIn community that I have that's going. So,
Yeah. That's such a
that's it.
beautiful, beautiful journey that you've had. It's like you didn't help with the marketing just to make them another buck in their bank, but it was for such a good cause. And it must have felt like exhilarating.
It was an added like, I always felt exhilarated for, helping the clients I had helped,
Yeah.
but this time it was more on an emotional level because
Mm.
I just think about how many people had, been
Yeah.
touched by cancer in always a negative way, and just to benefit that area of people really made me stop and say, "Do I wanna keep doing what I'm doing, or do I wanna
Yeah.
pivot and do something else that brings me more gratification?" And I decided for the latter. That it's been almost 18 years now.
Did you immediately pivot to nonprofits or was there a transition period?
There was a transition period. It was, actually, we were focusing mostly on sustainable
Ah,
businesses,
okay. Yeah.
and that was for-profit and nonprofit as long as they were in the
Mhm.
sustainability space. The actual name of the business was Vox Verde, green voice,
Wow.
and I like the verde part just to be a little bit, I don't know, more international, having 2 different words in there, and Vox, Latin based, and I just thought that was interesting, but then when I learned about accessibility, web accessibility, I kind of pulled back and thought, "Oh, we need to fold this into what we're doing," and that's when Design Positive became a name, and I trademarked it, and I got the domains and all that, and that's when it became Design Positive. So there's a little bit of a transition period for, like, about, I don't know, maybe, like, 2 years. Yeah.
So Here's the thing. You build an entire practice around web accessibility. Most agencies treat it like a checkbox. You made it the whole purpose. Why do you think everyone else is asleep at the wheel where you're taking it on with the accessibility for your web?
That is a it's a very overlooked question you're asking me, but for me, it's a very important one because people see it as like a checkbox. And you do it at the end of the project. You say, okay, now make the website accessible or whatever, or take our existing website and just make it accessible and check that box because they don't want to be sued. Right. And that's really a narrow way of looking at it because when you make your website accessible and you start with it at the beginning, working on the website and making it accessible all the way through and being part of the process, the design process, the end product is better, has better user experience, better user engagement, better retention. There's just so many benefits at the end of the product project when you start it then. But the benefits you get out of really bringing accessibility into your project are manyfold. Not being sued is something that, a lot of business owners definitely don't want, right? So that's number one. It's always, top of mind because when a demand letter comes to you as an organization, they can demand anywhere from typically 40,000 to like a million. I mean, it's just how big of a target is your business? And are you located, of course, in California or New York? Because that can be a determining factor because those two states have really strong laws for accessibility compliance. But two, it improves your SEO. So not only is your website more accessible, but it's more SEO friendly. So now you're gonna climb the charts through organic SEO. Three, you're going to bring in more viewers because let's just say you sell women's clothing. Right? Well, there's a lot of disabled people out there that wanna buy women's clothing. And if you are one of the 100 websites that, you're one of 100 companies, but you're the one that has accessible website for them to engage with, well, they're gonna shop at your store. They're not gonna shop everywhere else because they can't engage. They can't get in there and find what they want. So what that does is that realizes that that person, that shopper, sees your company as you saw me. You saw me as a user and you built your website accessible for me to shop at your store. So I am going to have a lot of love for your company. And what am I going to do? I'm going to tell all my friends in the accessibility space, all my disabled friends that know me in my chats and all that stuff. I'm going to say, hey, go to this website. They have a great website. It's accessible. And so they become your cheerleaders.
Mm.
So people they don't understand that either. So there's just so many other nuances to accessibility when you talk about disabilities, disabilities aren't just people that are born with them. Sometimes we have temporarily, disabled, like one that's simple, like if you go to the eye doctor and he puts those drops in your eyes and your pupils get really big and you really can't see things close up and everything. It doesn't last that long, but if you are going to get on your phone, you can't see things because you're just like that. But if the website was, coded and designed with accessibility for low vision in mind, you'd probably be able to see it and be fine. Or, let's say you're in bed and you have a little child or your partner in bed and you want to search something, you got the light really low on your screen and because you don't want to, um, you don't want to disturb their sleep. Well, when you bring down that brightness of your screen, if the website has good enough contrast, you can read it. You can see it.
Mm.
But a lot of websites don't, and then you have to crank it up, and then then they wake up, and then so that's what I talk about, like, you not having a good user experience. If the website was properly designed for low vision, then you would be able to go through the website and not have a problem, and you could do it at the lowest setting. So there's all these other little things that people don't realize that accessibility solves.
Yeah, I was just
And
gonna
it
add to that. Yeah.
and the thing is that the compliance rules are out there. You just follow them, and you're going to make your user engagement itself that much better for basically everybody because we're always going to be in an outside lighting, let's say, and you're on the phone while you're walking the dog or something, or you're outside at a festival or something, and there's light coming in on your screen on your phone, and it doesn't have a proper accessibility design in it. Your contrast may not be good enough for you to see things, and you're squinting your eyes and you're trying to see, or you're zooming it up, you're pulling it up so you can see it. Those things wouldn't be a problem. And again, You're creating a good user experience, no friction for the user. So, those are some of the things that people don't realize that accessibility provides for a brand.
Yeah, what was really interesting to me was you mentioned like everyday uses like for anyone, like for a
Mhm.
mother with a child and for somebody at a festival. Is accessibility I thought is just for like disabilities, right? But you mentioned everyday uses where you also can have that accessibility, which opens up this huge market for businesses as well as.
Right. And that's I mean, I'm so gung ho about it because I have lived it. I have seen it, I've designed it, I've experienced it, I've gotten feedback from users that are blind, people that have low vision, cognitive disabilities. And when you design to all of them and you hear their feedback, that's another gratifying moment. I have to tell
Yeah.
you, when they come back and they say, this website is the most user friendly website I've ever been in, that makes me feel really great. Because they're also usually getting content that they are hungry for and they're trying to navigate through, using third-party software and hardware, right? So yeah, that's great and beneficial, but again, people don't realize that it does affect everyday users. It just makes the user engagement overall better. And I'm so crazy about it that I am now writing a book about it. And again, I think I told you earlier now, the book is growing so much. I'm thinking about splintering it off into three different books, one for business leaders, one for creative marketers, and then another third book for basically just designers that really want to understand the branding and marketing aspects of how to take a brand and make it accessible and build it into their brand guidelines. Because when it's built into the brand guidelines book and you open up a guidelines book and it already does all the math and the work for you, it makes it a lot easier to work with that brand and communicate for that brand. Just like a brand guidelines book does, but I want to show people how to take an existing brand guidelines book and make it an accessible guidelines book where it helps you direct and understand how to use color and branding of that brand, how to work with that brand to keep it accessible and compliant.
So there's not just making it accessible, there's also keeping it accessible. Is that because the laws change, or are you trying to reach sort of more people with different accessibility sort of issues?
Actually, both. So the laws change. It's WCAG. It's not really a law. It's a compliance
Uh-huh.
that attorneys can use to sue somebody, but it's always lagged behind a year or two or more. Meaning that right now we're at 2.2 WCAG 2.2, but right now lawsuits are really using 2.0 as a standard base because 2.1 and 2.2 are so new. That I think probably this year, now that I say that, 2.1 is probably what they're gonna use as their standard base. They can use the compliance rules in that for lawsuits, but 2.2 will probably take at least another year or more before that becomes a lawsuit, standard, and, the next version is gonna be probably 3.0. So that's gonna be, I think, a year or 2 or more because it takes a lot of time because it's a collective of people all around the world. Doesn't change that often, but what does change is technology. So the other aspect of what you asked is that the technology changes. Let's say you have a WordPress website and it has 20 plugins, right? Well, when you update the WordPress software and then you update those 20 plugins, one of them doesn't work well with the other and causes a problem, then you got to go in there and find that problem and find out, oh, do I just roll back this one plugin because it's not really made for prime time, and then that solves the problem, or you might update it and not know it, but it creates an accessibility issue that's not showing. It's not visible to you, but it is visible to people with disabilities in their software, because the way they interact with the website is usually third-party software and hardware, right? So they have a whole set of tools that allows them to engage with the website. And it all depends on the type of needs that they have. Some may not have third party software and hardware. They might just use their keyboard and be able to tab through a page or just see it in a Zoom form. And they want to see the contrast because they have low vision, or they might have perfect vision, but they're not able to move their hands and fingers, and they use other means to click through the page. So that could be a third-party software that they use and hardware to do that. I always tell clients, the best thing you can do to keep your website compliant is to get a third-party auditor, accessibility auditor to come in, audit your website, and then have your team do all the remediation and work with the auditor. Do not let the auditor do any of the
Mm.
work. Only let them show you the problems, help you fix the problems. Then they'll review the problems and make sure that they're done properly. And then they'll give you a letter of compliance with a date, meaning that we reviewed your website and we have gone through remediation rounds, and your website now is 100% compliant, right? And then you take that letter and you stick it aside, and then every 6 months or a year, depending on how often you update your website, um, you would do it again. And
Mm.
every time you do it after that, it's typically very fast. The first one is the one that takes the longest because you're usually going from nothing
Yeah.
to compliance, right? But as you do it every 6 months, you keep getting that letter of compliance, and the reason why that's important is that if someone ever does come to your website and they do get their attorneys involved and they do send you a demand letter and they sue you for not having an accessible website,
God forbid.
it happens more than you think. Even though your website is accessible, I have seen people get demand letters because a certain technology was not accessible. And sometimes there are attorneys out there that are less, I don't know how I would say this to be politically correct, but let's just say less so.
Well, yeah.
And they would send that demand letter not knowing really what they're doing, but they're just
Mhm.
sending the demand letter on to the company, and the company can respond saying, "No, our website is accessible. Here are all our letters of compliance over the last 3 or 4 or 5 years, and we have a stack of them, and we have an accessibility statement
Mm.
at the bottom of every page of our website to contact us if you don't have access if you can't find access to something because technology always changes." And then you go back and say, "What exactly does your client have a hard time accessing?" And then your team goes through and reviews what that problem was to find out if it's real or if they might have just been using an online scanning system, like a software, that is typically 60% right, 40% wrong. And what I mean by that is that the free scanning software that's out there to check a website for accessibility, 60% of what it comes back in the report is correct, and 40% is not correct because you need a human being to review the data coming back and know what they're doing when they review it. I can't tell you how many types of software that I've reviewed for all different types of companies, and none of them are 100%, not even close. I'd say the best one I ever tried was like 70 something percent right and still, 28% wrong. So, um, you always need a human involved. And with AI coming into the fold, there's a lot of hope that we can break that barrier and have websites that are more accessible and compliant. But I think I've gotten a little off track there, but the technology is the aspect of what I was talking about as a twofold there. So it is the laws do change, the compliance rules change, and technology is always changing. And then you have clients always updating their website, and somebody might come in and update a part of the website, and they might not have updated, or they might not have put their content in there properly, and they could have put their information in there in a non-accessible way and not known it. That's why you always want your team to be the ones doing the remediation because they retain it and they remember it. So next time they update that part of the website that was broken before, it won't be broken again because they know what not to do.
There's definitely a lot more that goes into the accessibility than I thought it does. I mean, you even mentioned there's softwares running in the background, like code for different platforms, whatever they're using, depending on the disability they have. Definitely a lot more complex than I initially thought.
Mm.
Now, I'm wondering if you can walk me through a scenario where somebody who got sued came to you, and I'm wondering what that conversation was like.
Let me tell you this. So we have attorneys that will reach out to us, and because their client has a demand letter for their website not being accessible, and we will first look at the demand letter to find out what the issue is. And I'll give you a what I would say a typical scenario is, and you'll get the demand letter, and they'll state maybe one, two, three, or four different things of what the user was having a hard time accessing. And we'll go through and make sure that those are correct. And if they are, then we let the client know that, yes, we did review what they are saying and they are correct. And if they're not, we'll tell them why it's not correct. And then we'll tell them, we'll give them all the supporting documentation so they can take that back to the attorney, the client's attorney, and illustrate to them that they're incorrect with their assessment. And if the client has had, an accessible website and all these compliance letters that I mentioned earlier, these letters of compliance, then they can also give them that information. And then at the bottom of their website, if they have an accessibility statement page, a link to that page, they can also provide them that because obviously the user did not look at that page. They just went straight to the attorney. And that does happen, but typically that will be the case if there is a problem and let's say the attorney that came to us to help their client to be accessible, we will review their information in two ways. One, we will have them have an auditor, an accessibility auditor come in and review their website in extensiveness. So we can have a third party viewer involved, and then we do the remediation with that auditor, because by having a third party auditor, you're having somebody come into the picture that doesn't have any skin in the game. They are just there to assess and review and to make sure that the website is accessible. If they were doing the remediation, then it doesn't really bode well having them doing the auditing and the remediation. Do you follow me? But so when you have, when you have your team doing the remediation and they're doing the auditing, then, a judge will see that as, okay, we have somebody in here that's technically advanced in auditing, and they're stipulating these problems, and they remediated it, they reviewed it, and they approved it, these professionals. Then they'll give the letter of compliance. They'll serve the letter of compliance to the attorney saying, we've fixed this, whatever. And the attorney they'll either do one of two things. They'll either fight them and go to court, which costs tens of thousands of dollars, or they might just fix the website and then just settle out of court for an undisclosed amount. And that happens more than often, is just settling out of court.
This is
And
crazy.
I can't tell you how much they settle out of court because it is not disclosed. So I never know, no matter how much I work on the project, how intimate I am with the project, I'd never know how much they settle out of court for.
I'm just getting down to the reason. Like, if I'm in California and I think you mentioned New York, can I just sue anyone? Like, oh, that website's not accessible to me because I've got this disability that I can prove, for example.
Well, if you live in the United States, you can sue anybody for anything just about. Um, so, that's just the nature of, we're a very litigious society, but Europe is also cracking down, and their actually accessibility compliance laws are much stringent than ours. And I'm very happy to see that and hear that. But if you don't do business in Europe, then you don't really have to worry about it per se. Even if people come to your website, but you don't do business in Europe, then you're not really held liable for their standards. But WCAG 2.2 that I mentioned earlier, that's really the world compliance. But going back to what I said about the kind of the typical compliance and demand letter scenario, if your website is compliant and you get a demand letter because maybe they were using scanning software and it has all these problems in it, and they just threw that at you like, oh, there's all these problems with your website, and you review them and they're just false because of that difference I told you about, where the majority, like 30 to 40% of the problems they find are not real, but they send those to you as, those are the problems for your website, we're suing you for $50,000. When you respond to them, it's best to have an auditor or a company like ours review their case, and you can review what they said were wrong. You stipulate how it's incorrect. You send it back to them. You send the copy that's on your accessibility statement page and how it's on their website, saying this is the content that's already on every page of our website for accessibility statement that you can click on at the bottom and go to our page, and here's all the information about how we made our website accessible, and here are a stack of compliance letters over the years. And when you do that, sometimes the attorney will just disappear. They won't even respond.
Wow.
Or if they're a little nasty, they might go out and find your brand on all these social platforms and all these other third-party platforms, like even like Yelp or companies like that. And then they'll show you how those platforms are inaccessible and throw that at you. And it's like, this is not our platform. These are not our problems. We don't have control over those platforms. So we don't have the ability to manipulate the code to make it accessible. So you need to talk to them about that. But going back to your original comment, what is it that your client is having a problem accessing? Just always bring back the conversation to what is it exactly that your client is having a problem accessing, right? Because typically, if, like I mentioned, they send a demand letter and we find out that what they were saying that was inaccessible is accessible, is part of meets the code for compliance, then there's no problem. But if there is something there that we can understand, it might be their problem. It might be their software or their hardware needs to be updated on their end, and it's their problem, not ours. So that can happen, but you'd be amazed at how just about anybody can be sued for anything in the United States when it comes to accessibility. It happens quite often, more so in California and New York because of their laws. And there are some attorneys that just kind of have like a rubber stamp and they just will send out, demand letters left and right.
Yeah. I don't know if other people realize how big this is. I personally didn't. I'm sure that people living in the States do. But there was 67,000 lawsuits last year, and you also mentioned in our previous chat that Beyonce got hit as well, and so did Dominos. So why do you think more agencies aren't positioning this as a risk mitigation play, or are they?
They are more so now than ever, but I want to talk about the number you just dropped, that 67,000. That may be a global number, but not a US number. A US
Okay.
number is in between
Yeah.
6 and 7,000. It's growing basically every year. It's more and more every year, but I think it is a risk assessment to address your question. And I think, like Domino's was like the big one when that was years ago. And when they were sued, they decided to fight it, and then they found out they were in the wrong. They were in the wrong. And I can't remember how much they settled for, but it was a lot of money.
I can imagine.
And then years later, Beyonce was sued, and I'm not sure exactly how hers went, but I think it's interesting to say those 2 because Domino's in the United States is a very large pizza brand. I mean, they're a big food brand, whereas Beyonce is like an individual artist. And I think showing the difference of the 2 different types of brands can both be held accountable. So I always tell clients, especially my bigger clients, the bigger you are, the bigger the target you are. And the more business you do in New York and California, the more you need to be aware and need to be prepared.
So you mentioned this is a California, New York thing, but do you believe it's spreading across the other states as well?
Yeah, it is because more and more people, here's what I've been noticing over the years that I'm hopeful for, and I'm also saddened by. I'm saddened by the fact that literally when I started doing this over 10 years ago, 12 years ago or so, when I started doing web accessibility, like 10% of the internet was accessible. And here we are that many years later, and we're pretty much still the same. It really hasn't changed. There's not that much of the website, not that much of the web that's accessible. And that's sad. But I have noticed that more and more companies have like an accessibility officer or a director of accessibility or some sort of vice president of accessibility or some sort of director of accessibility on staff, the bigger the company gets. And that signals to me that they are taking it more seriously. Now, I have gone to some very large brand websites and I have tested their accessibility compliance. And I got to be honest, I always find something. And because it's so technical and sometimes it's so nuanced, like this particular typeface at this size doesn't have enough high contrast ratio to meet compliance. If they just make that type bold, then that would make it compliant because it's thicker. So,
It's
I mean,
not huge, but there
it's
is
not
little
huge,
things.
it's
Yeah.
silly little things like that. Or the biggest problem that every website has is making their photographs not have what we call alt text, alternative text, which alt text is usually just a description of what you're seeing, right? So if there was alt text, if I took a still shot of myself, I would say middle-aged man with gray hair and beard, black shirt, on a microphone, speaking with framed artwork behind him. That would be the alt text to describe me. So when there's a lot of photography on websites, All the photos that are conveying messages need to have an alt text to it. Logos, same thing. Sometimes you can get by with logos of just saying, XYZ company logo, period. You don't have to describe what's in the logo if you don't want to, but it's always better to do that, but it makes it longer, the alt text, because someone who is blind is listening to the website. So if you have a
Mm.
whole bunch of characters, you want to make your alt text as compressed and simple as possible while conveying what the image is. Now, if you have imagery in your website that is ornamental, it's not really communicative, then you just put a period and there's nothing there. And that tells
Um,
them that it's just an illustration or a background image that doesn't really mean anything. It's like a color. You follow?
yeah.
Yeah.
Taylor, I'm curious, how do you connect with businesses? Do they often come to you or do you often reach out to them? What sort of system has worked best for you in that regards?
I would say both. I post a lot on LinkedIn about accessibility, about design, about communications, about trust building through design, and I get a lot of reach with that just because it touches a lot of people and I have a lot of, growing, community base on there. And then referrals. I can't tell you, I mean, I we just got a new client about a month ago and they needed an annual report done in 2 months, done in their hands. And so we're wrapping that up now.
Yeah.
And we had worked with one of their directors at a completely different company, and they just said, "Well, we've had a great success with this company, call them." And so they did. They called us and we talked, and it was like we were working with them, like, in 2 hours, we were starting the project. So we get a lot of those, a lot of referrals.
Yeah, I mean, referrals are great, but let's talk about the elephant in the room because
Mhm.
some of the conversation I've been having with agency owners is the fact that referrals don't scale. So I'm wondering, Taylor, have you cracked the system for referrals in order to make it work for you, or it's making sure you don't have all your eggs in one basket?
Yeah, that's a good point. So a few things. One, we don't wanna scale too fast. We like to just grow at an organic and I wouldn't say a slow rate, but a progressive rate so that
Manageable.
it's manageable because we need to be able to manage the work coming in. If we need to hire more people to come in, we have a grueling hiring process and we know exactly who we're looking for when we're looking for designers to help out. And it's not your average typical requirements like what we're looking for in a designer. And unfortunately, I can't give you my secret sauce for that because I don't want to ruin the future designers that we're going to be interviewing. So we talked about the not growing too fast. We're not really keen on that, but we want to find the right clients. And
Mm.
that is us also. We're not just going to take anybody off the street. We're going to have a conversation with them to find out if we're the right fit for them. And even our website, there is a weeding out process just going through the content on our website so that if our content speaks to you, then those are the type of people that reach out to us. And some people read our copy and not call us, and that's fine. So I'm not so worried about scaling fast or scaling huge. I just wanna scale right.
Yeah. No, that makes sense, Taylor. But sort of the question in the back of everyone's mind is what happens when suddenly the referrals stop?
Then I'll hit the ground running. I'll reach out, I'll shake the trees, find out what's happening out there in the industry, and I'll reach out to my existing clients saying,
Mm.
"Hey, we have openings coming up.
Mm.
If you know anybody who's been looking for XYZ, um, let us know. We have space available coming up next month or whatever." Or they might actually say, "Well, that's great because we have projects, da da da." So that's typically how we've been filling the void, if you will. But I think, maybe to speak to how we might wanna level up in that department would be advertising. Just
Mm.
flat out buying ads on LinkedIn or Google Ads, things like that.
Yeah, of course, because there might be that market out there of business owners that are not aware of how severe this actually is, and hopefully this podcast brings a lot of educational value and content for them because it did for me, certainly.
Cool. I'm glad. I hope so, because I really wanna move that needle for 10% of the internet being accessible. I would love it to be 50 or more. I mean,
Is it only 10% now?
only 10% still.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
some people say it's less, some people say it's like 7 or
Well,
more,
you've got a
7 or
lot of
8.
work cut out for yourself then, Taylor. It's just making sure they're aware that they actually need the solution.
Yeah, everybody needs to have their website accessible. Like I mentioned before, there's just so many other components that a lot of business leaders, creatives don't realize that comes with making a website accessible. It's not just making the website accessible for people with disabilities, which is the core reason, but all these added benefits come on board with it that it just makes better business sense,
Hmm.
on so many levels.
So you say it's website. So is there anyone that's got a service-based business? I'm guessing anyone that's local that's also got a website. If you've got a website and you're within those states, you're doing services or e-commerce, anything like that, you've got to have a accessible website.
That's correct. So one thing we didn't talk about, speaking of like small businesses that might use platforms like Wix, Squarespace, or things of that nature, you're building a website on those platforms, and those platforms are really the ones that are held accountable, but you need to do your part on what you have control over to make the
Mm.
website accessible for like low vision and things like that, and choosing the right colors and rollover states for buttons and interactive elements. So you have to do your due diligence for what you have control over on those platforms. And then that platform needs to be able to manage their part, which is the code part, for those third party software and hardware elements for accessibility.
Mm.
Currently, this is the early spring 2026. Of all the different off the shelf platforms out there that I've reviewed, Squarespace is probably the best at having more of accessible websites and giving you more control over the code to ensure that the website is accessible. But again, a whole there's a ton of platforms out there. Some of them are really bad though and have zero control to make a website accessible. So,
No, thank you for dropping that in. That's very important, especially for smaller guys that won't be able to afford all this. Do you have anything for them on your website that maybe some steps that they can take themselves if they're too small to hire somebody?
I don't yet.
Well,
I'm
you're gonna
working on
have to after this podcast.
I know, and you're putting the fire under my seat. I've been on another project. I'm also working on doing some classes that I
Mm,
wanna do
nice.
online. And I want to chunk them down into bite-size video presentations and to make it easier for creatives to understand what we talked about today in much, much more in more detail, to make it easier for people to understand this world and this space. So hopefully by the end of this year or maybe the end of the summer, depending on how my world, transpires over the next 6, 8 months, I will have some classes that people can go online and they can get to them through our website,
Yeah. You know what would be
designpositive.
really cool, Taylor? Maybe you with somebody else is where you're going through live through some websites and going through this can be accessible by putting this, and that in place. And just like a little walkthrough, it's probably going to be small things that you're fixing, but it's just putting that awareness out there like, this is not accessible because of X, Y, and Z.
It's very interesting that you say that because one of my concepts that I have not done yet was I was going to record reviewing large brands' websites that I know they have the funding to make accessible and using their large brand and presence to showcase their failure. And I want to do it in a tasteful way. I don't want to just be pointing the finger at them, but
Yeah.
I do want to show that, um, you know, this is a brand that if they ever saw my video, they would just fix the problem immediately.
Mm.
And I would be able to show others that, even though you're a big
Mm.
brand, you still have these compliant problems. I've been toying with that, but
Let me
I
know
don't
when that comes out. You just obviously you have to be careful of copywriting, probably putting out that the fact that it's your opinion and it's not like protect yourself legally, of course.
yeah.
You
Yeah,
wouldn't want
because again, anybody in America can sue
yeah,
anybody
you
for
just
just
said
about
that. So
anything.
imagine a big company like Nike coming after you.
Yeah.
It
Yeah,
would be
I mean,
detrimental.
like I said, I've even reviewed some of the biggest websites,
Yeah.
and I have found let's put it this way, I find fewer problems on their websites. But even like one of my top websites, I still found one thing and I was like, "Wow, I mean, I should probably go back and look at it and see if it's fixed," because
Yeah.
sometimes, the websites are always changing that sometimes
Yeah.
they change so fast they don't have time to, review and do their auditing quick enough.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling, isn't it? It's just like these
It
big
is.
guys, they have like probably their own department who's looking after this and they
Oh,
miss that
absolutely,
problem.
100%, 1,000%. Depends on the larger the business, the more that's gonna happen. Like I said, I spoke about AI. I really hope like there's a lot of people in the accessibility space that are hoping that platforms will start using AI in their code to highlight accessibility problems as a website is being built.
Mhm.
So that would be like you're auditing, like when you're doing spell check when you're typing and it highlights a word that's, misspelled, like that. So you're building a website, then when you're done and you hit update or whatever, it automatically does a report showing you and then maybe even fixing it. So those are some of the things that are on the horizon. You know, from my point of view, AI is is such a we're at such young stages of it that we really have years to go until it really can do like what I just mentioned.
Yeah. We'll see. It could be in the next few months, right? We just need to keep our eyes out because at the rate it's accelerating now, it is very rapid. Taylor, thank you so much for sharing all your value and the depths of accessibility for websites. I definitely learned a lot, and I'm sure anyone listening has as well. If people wanted to connect with you, learn more about your services or what you're doing next, where should they look?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I'm really vocal on LinkedIn. So if you just search for Taylor Martin Design Positive, you'll find me. Or you can go to our website, designpositive.co, and you can follow us there. Uh, I do have to say though, LinkedIn is like I said, where I'm mostly vocal, and I DM with people all day long.
Yeah.
I enjoy the community there, and I've really been building a base of very interesting people. I have a great tribe on there, so I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn.
Yeah, awesome, Taylor. We'll make sure all the links are dropped below so people can locate you easily. And for anyone watching, if you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe and let me know down below in the comments your favorite takeaway from Taylor.